Hey there, and welcome to your personal deep dive. Ready to explore the world of South African wines? We've got a fantastic selection of your materials, from history books to tasting notes, all about these wines.
It seems like you're interested in more than just a casual sip. You want to really understand what makes them special.
And that's what we're here for. Let's uncork this knowledge, shall we? We'll journey through the history of South African winemaking, explore those unique regions, and even give you a taste of what to expect in your glass.
We'll make sure you come away with a true understanding of this dynamic wine region, maybe even impress your friends with some newfound expertise.
Sounds good to me. Okay, to kick things off, I was really struck by this book, Vinhos da África do Sul. It really dives deep into the history, starting all the way back in the 17th century. Did you know that South African winemaking has such deep roots?
It's true. The Dutch East India Company played a major role, establishing a refreshment station at the Cape of Good Hope. Those early settlers really laid the groundwork for what would become a thriving wine industry.
It's amazing to think that something as simple as needing to refresh sailors would spark this whole industry. And then enter the French Huguenots, bringing with them a whole new level of winemaking expertise in the late 1600s.
Their influence was significant. They introduced grape varieties like Chenin Blanc, which have really flourished in the South African climate and soil, what we call terroir.
Ah, terroir! That magical word that encompasses the soil, the climate, the history. It all ends up in the glass. And
Yeah.
South Africa seems to have a real tapestry of terroir.
Absolutely. The combination of diverse soils, warm sunshine, and those cool ocean breezes creates ideal conditions for grape growing.
But it hasn't always been smooth sailing for South African winemakers. The Vinhas de África do Sul book also talked about the challenges they faced during the apartheid era.
Yes, that's an important part of the story. International sanctions and isolation during that time deeply impacted the South African wine trade.
It's a good reminder that there's often a complex history behind the things we enjoy. But what's truly inspiring is the industry's resilience.
Absolutely. After the end of apartheid, South African winemakers were determined to reclaim their place on the world stage, and they've done a remarkable job.
They've gone from an industry facing adversity to winning awards and appearing on wine lists all over the world. It's a real comeback story. Now, I know when people think of South African wine, they often jump straight to Stellenbosch.
Stellenbosch is iconic, and for good reason. It's picturesque, historically significant, and produces incredible wines.
Exactly. But today, we're going beyond the Stellenbosch bubble. We want you to discover the full spectrum of what South Africa has to offer.
And trust me, there's a lot to discover. You've clearly got an adventurous palate, and South Africa is ready to satisfy that curiosity.
So let's set off on this adventure. Our first stop, Paarl, a region known for producing some powerful red wines.
The climate there is a key factor. Hot and dry, it's perfect for those full-bodied reds you were mentioning.
And I read that they have granite soils in Paarl, which adds another layer of complexity. What's the impact of those granite soils?
Granite brings a distinct minerality to the wine. It can add a flinty character, sometimes even a subtle smokiness.
Wow, smoky and flinty. Now we're talking. If someone really enjoys Cabernet Sauvignon but wants a bit more depth, would you say Paarl is a good place to start?
Absolutely, it's Cabernet heaven. But don't overlook their Shiraz either. It often has a peppery spice that's really intriguing.
Noted. Okay, up next, a region that already sounds right up my alley, Franschhoek.
Ah, French chouk. Imagine stunning scenery, charming towns, and elegant wines. It's all about the experience.
I love that they focus on the whole package. So, what kind of wines are we likely to find in Franschhoek?
You'll find a bit of everything, but they are particularly known for their Sauvignon Blancs, often with a lovely minerality and those classic herbaceous notes.
That's making me wish I had a glass in hand right now. Okay, we've done Paarl, we've done Franschhoek, but we can't forget about Swartland.
Swartland is a region that's really making waves with its focus on natural winemaking.
I've heard a lot about natural wines lately. It seems like there's a real movement toward letting the grapes express themselves with minimal intervention.
Exactly. It's about organic practices, minimal intervention in the cellar, and a real focus on letting that terroir shine through.
I like it. Authenticity in a bottle. Okay, we've touched on some of the inland regions, but what about the coast? What's happening in the coastal region?
As you might expect, the coastal region is where you'll find those refreshing whites and rosés that thrive in a cooler climate.
Perfect for those hot South African days. Okay, last but not least, we have to talk about Constantia. What I found really interesting about Constantia is its history.
Constantia is the granddaddy of South African wine regions. It's the oldest.
That's right. It's older than even Stellenbosch and has quite the reputation.
Historically, Constantia was known for its sweet wines. In fact, they produced a dessert wine called Vin de Constance that was enjoyed by royalty all over Europe.
Royalty approved? I'm sold. But I read that Constantia isn't just about sweet wines these days. They are producing a great selection of dry wines as well, right?
Absolutely. You'll find stunning Sauvignon Blancs, elegant Chardonnays, even some really interesting Pinot Noirs coming out of Constantia. It's a region that truly showcases its versatility.
Talk about a region that stood the test of time. Now, we've covered a lot of ground geographically, but there's one more element we need to explore: the grapes themselves. And from what I've gathered, South Africa has a really fascinating mix of familiar and unique grapes. But we'll save that juicy conversation for after the break.
All right, let's talk grapes. We've got a lot to cover here because South Africa isn't just producing the classics. They've got their own unique grapes that are just waiting to be discovered.
You're right, their range is impressive. They've got the familiar favorites like Cabernet Sauvignon and Chardonnay, but then those indigenous grapes, they really showcase the country's individuality.
And there's one grape in particular that I know we have to talk about, Pinotage. It's like South Africa's signature grape,
Yeah.
right? You could say that. Pinotage is a real point of pride for South Africa. It's a cross between Pinot Noir and Cinsault, created back in 1925 by a professor at Stellenbosch University.
Wait, Pinot Noir and Cinsault, that's quite the combination. What were they going for with that cross?
Well, the idea was to combine the elegance of Pinot Noir with the hardiness of Cinsault, which was known to thrive in the South African heat.
So they basically Frankenstein a grape perfectly suited for their climate. I like it. But what does it taste like? Give me the lowdown on Pinotage.
Pinotage is known for its bold flavors. Think ripe plums, dark berries, often with a smoky or earthy undertone. Some even pick up hints of coffee or chocolate.
Okay, that sounds like a flavor profile I can get behind. So if I'm looking for a wine that's full of personality and a little bit different, Pinotage is the way to go.
Absolutely. It's a wine that demands your attention, rewards you with its complexity.
I'm adding it to my list. Okay, so we've covered the rock star, Pinotage. But I know South Africa cultivates a lot of other grapes as well. Let's talk about some of those international varieties, starting with the reds.
When it comes to reds, you'll find all the big names, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Shiraz. But what's fascinating is how they express themselves differently in the South African terroir.
So it's not just about the grape, it's about how that grape interacts with the environment, the soil, the climate, everything.
Precisely. So you might have a favorite Cabernet Sauvignon from another region, but try the South African version. You might be surprised by its unique character, maybe a brighter acidity or more pronounced fruit flavors.
That's what I love about exploring different wine regions. It's like tasting familiar grapes with a whole new perspective. Okay, what about white wines? What should we be on the lookout for?
For white wines, Sauvignon Blanc is a star in South Africa. They consistently produce these crisp, zesty Sauvignon Blancs with a wonderful minerality.
Perfect for a warm day.
Absolutely. And then there's Chenin Blanc. Remember we talked about the French Huguenots? Well, they brought this grape with them, and it's found a true home in South Africa. It's actually the most widely planted white grape there.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed that. What makes Chenin Blanc so special?
Chenin Blanc is incredibly versatile. It can be made into a wide range of styles, from dry and crisp to off-dry, and even slightly sweet. You'll find Chenin Blancs with aromas of green apple and citrus, others with honey and stone fruit. It all depends on how it's made.
It's a grape of many talents. Okay, any other white grapes we should have on our radar?
Well, for something a little different, keep an eye out for Viognier. It's not as widely planted, but it produces these beautifully aromatic wines with notes of honeysuckle and apricot. And of course, you can't forget Chardonnay. It might be a classic, but South African Chardonnay often has a lovely richness and complexity.
It's clear that South African winemakers are truly masters of their craft, working with such a diverse palette of grapes.
They are. And they're not just focused on what's in the bottle, they're also thinking about the bigger picture.
Oh, tell me more about that.
Sustainability is becoming a core value for many South African wineries. They're implementing eco-friendly practices, conserving water, preserving biodiversity. It's really impressive.
I love that. It's so important to support wineries that are taking care of the environment. But we'll dive deeper into the world of South African wine and sustainability right after this.
I'm happy to. This is a topic I'm really passionate about, and we'll also answer your questions like, what should you look for on a label to make sure you're choosing a sustainable bottle?
I can't wait to learn more. We'll be back in a flash, so don't go anywhere. All right, so South African wine and sustainability, what does that look like in practice?
Well, it's really multifaceted. Many wineries are implementing practices like water conservation, using less water in their vineyards and cellars.
That's important everywhere, but especially in regions prone to drought.
Exactly. And it's not just about using less, it's about using smarter. Some wineries are even collecting rainwater or using treated wastewater for irrigation.
Wow. So they're really thinking outside the box. What about in the vineyards themselves? What are they doing to promote sustainability there?
A lot of wineries are moving away from chemical pesticides and herbicides, opting for more natural alternatives to protect the vines.
Like what?
Things like cover crops to prevent erosion and attract beneficial insects, or even using sheep or ducks to naturally manage weeds and pests.
Sheep and ducks in the vineyard. That's a new one for me.
It's becoming increasingly popular. It's a win-win, promoting biodiversity, reducing the need for harsh chemicals.
I love that. Now, I've also heard a lot about organic wines lately. Is organic a big part of the South African wine scene?
It's definitely growing. More and more South African wineries are going through the certification process to become officially recognized as organic.
And what does that certification process entail?
Well, it's pretty rigorous. It means adhering to strict standards when it comes to things like vineyard management, harvesting practices, and what can and cannot be added during the winemaking process.
So no sneaky additives for those organic wines.
Exactly. It's all about keeping things as natural as possible.
Now, if I'm at the store browsing the shelves, what should I look for on a label to make sure I'm choosing a sustainably produced South African wine?
Great question. There are a few certifications to keep an eye out for. One is the Biodiversity and Wine Initiative seal, which indicates that the winery is committed to protecting the Cape Floral Kingdom, a biodiversity hotspot.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that about the Cape Floral Kingdom. That's amazing.
It's a really special place. Another certification is the Integrated Production of Wine seal, or IPW.
IPW, what does that stand for?
IPW is all about promoting environmentally responsible practices throughout the entire winemaking process, from vineyard to bottle.
Okay, so IPW, Biodiversity and Wine Initiative. Anything else I should be looking for?
And of course, the good old organic certification is always a good sign.
Perfect. Okay, so we've covered history, we've explored diverse regions, we've dove into unique grapes, and we've even touched on the world of sustainable winemaking. I have to say, I'm feeling pretty well versed in the world of South African wines.
Me too. It's been a pleasure sharing my passion for these wines with you.
But before we go, I have one last very important question. Where do we go from here?
Well, the best way to truly understand South African wine is to taste it.
Agreed. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before they embark on their own South African wine adventures?
Don't be afraid to step outside of your comfort zone and try something new. You might just discover your new favorite wine.
Words to live by. And on that note, cheers to new discoveries and amazing wines. Until next time, happy tasting.